Hey friends, thanks for joining me, Jim Baroud, to hear a few insights from leaders who represent our innovation ecosystem. Today's chat is with Anthony Frasier, the founder and CEO of ABF Creative. He's also an author and a serial entrepreneur. And Mike Bisceglia, executive producer at ABF Creative.
My name is Anthony Frasier. I'm the CEO of ABF Creative, and we are a kids and family podcast company based in Newark, New Jersey.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
My name is Mike Bisceglia, executive producer with ABF Creative, work alongside Anthony and help keep production moving on all of the amazing projects and podcasts that we've got cooking up at ABF.
Great. Mike, let's go back into your incredible background. Talk to us about your corporate and now entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah. First off, I've always had a love of podcasting. It's something that started for me when I was in Charlottesville, Virginia, getting my early chops in sports radio. I've always had an interest in it. But I moved back up north to New York, where I was involved in sports radio. I produced for CBS Sports Radio for 9 years, did a morning show for about 5 years. And when I was doing the morning show at CBS Sports Radio, you get up at 3 a.m, do your thing. This is in New York City. I'd be out of the office around 11:30, 12, and drive back home. And I kind of got bored of it, to be honest. Like, it got to a point where I just wasn't really into it as much. It kind of became like the hamster wheel of work. And I decided to I needed a secondary job, and I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And my wife really pushed me on the idea of becoming an Uber Eats delivery driver. And at first I was like, I don't know if I want to do Uber Eats. It sounds kind of silly. Like, I don't know about it. But I was like, hell, let's take a chance. So I did Uber Eats delivery, and I realized that I love doing it. I really enjoy delivering food. It was good for my brain. It helped me if I had anxiety. It helped me when I was dealing with stuff. It was like therapy for me. But the other thing I noticed was there were some crazy stories that were happening on the road that were happening. And I was telling everybody these stories, all these experiences. And I realized then I was like, this would be a cool podcast if I told people my adventures on the road as an Uber Eats driver. So I say all this to connect the dots on my journey to ABF Creative because I think it's kind of cool. When the Popeyes chicken sandwich craze was going on and it was wild and people were freaking out about it, I was doing a drop off once and I went to a restaurant. I was like, oh, it was like a dual Popeyes Burger King. And I went to do the Burger King pickup and everybody was here at this Popeyes. I was like, oh, wow, this chicken sandwich thing is for real. I've got to talk to people about the Popeyes chicken sandwich. So later on in the day, I had a drop off in Harrison, New Jersey, dropped off a meal. And it just so happened, I was like, oh, there's a Popeyes right here. Let me connect. So I go inside and I'm like, I'm going to randomly talk to different people about this Popeyes chicken sandwich. So I go up to person A, person B, person C. What do you think? Is it good? Is it overrated? Is it worth the hype? And one of the people I randomly went up to was Anthony Frasier. And I went up to him and I said, what do you think of this chicken sandwich? I'm doing this for my podcast. All the spiel I just said just now here on yours. And he said, I have my own podcast network. And from there we connected and my journey kind of shifted where I sort of faded out from CBS, started doing more work with ABF and realized that's where my passion lied and continued on all my podcast fun and wanted to make it a career.
That's awesome. What a fascinating journey, right? The Uber Eats part, especially. Okay, Anthony, talk to us about yours.
My journey was entrepreneurial journey. I never had a corporate journey, and I pretty much been an entrepreneur since the beginning. And it really just started when I created a video game website. And so on this video game website, we were giving reviews and previews and just talking video games. The same way, Mike had a show where he was talking sports. We just treat video games like sports. Xbox versus PlayStation, Nintendo versus Sega, like all of that kind of stuff. And then eventually I wanted to take it more serious, so I found a startup in Montclair, New Jersey, called Bubbleline, and I ended up getting an internship with them by showing them the website that I built for video games. And they were like, "Oh man, you know what you're doing, so let's hire you immediately." So I interned there for about 6 months, and after 6 months, they hired me full time as a business development associate, and that's how I kind of like got into the tech industry in general. Is really just creating something on my own. It's funny. That's how the tech industry works today, where the best portfolio, the best resume you can have is really just a record of what you already did. You know, if you want to be a programmer, go build a great website and use that as your portfolio. You know, so it's just that's how I kind of snuck in. You know, I have a long history in tech, so I won't go through all of that for the sake of the podcast, but that's how I initially got into the tech industry.
Great, great. Well, and let's segue into that. How you started the ABF. Obviously, you have some background there, which you just talked about, but talk to us about sort of that segue and how it's
Yeah.
grown.
Well, you know, ABF Creative was started because, you know, you know, all honestly, I saw a friend of mine who got hired as a host of a podcast, and I saw and I was like, hey, man, you got hired as a host of a podcast. How much did you make? I love podcasts. He was like, when he told me the number, I was like, wait, this for a podcast, a full year salary, like, you know, and in my mind, it was just I couldn't fathom that. Yo, you can do something super creative, super fun, super interesting, and make a career out of it. And it wasn't tech, but it was close enough to tech for me. And I was like, all right, I'm out of here. Like I didn't want to create software. I didn't want to create an app. I wanted to tell stories. And when I figured out that you can make a business out of telling stories similar to the film industry, but with audio, that's when I knew, like, hey, this is definitely something I want to do. I've always had a passion for audio, always had a passion for storytelling. You know, going back to when I was doing the video game stuff, we had a podcast. That's how we got the site well known, because we had a podcast where we were just talking and debating about video games. So to me, it was very easy to pick up and start running. I got my first mic, which wasn't even a real mic. It was a field recorder that I got for free because I told a company I'll do a review on it. I never did the review. I owe them a review to this day. But they sent me the free field recorder, and I recorded like our first season, our first podcast at ABF Creative, which was VC Cheat Sheet, which is a venture capital based podcast. I recorded our whole first season off of that.
Wow, that's really interesting, Anthony. Now, Mike, you came into the picture. Talk to us about how you are, you know, taking ABF to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's cool to hear Anthony say that backstory and talk about, you know, VC cheat sheet and starting everything. And as ABF has grown and has done a lot of magnificent things, you know, there's room and need for producers to help Anthony out, who can't be in all the places at one time. Like I always respect Anthony so much because, like, if he was to start you start a podcast and you say, who's the host? Anthony Frazier. Who's the producer? Anthony Frazier. Who's the editor? Anthony Frazier. But as things grow and build and you can't be in so many places at so many times, you know, there's a need for producers and editors and so on that make great podcasts. So I sort of fit in the puzzle where, you know, I come in, learn the ABF creative DNA on what makes a good story, what makes a good show, in particular right now with children's content. And, you know, it's my job to fit in the pieces of the puzzle and keep that production moving, get audio to the engineers, work with writers, work with different producers at different stations. Like to me, it's always fascinating because people say, you know, what does a producer do? And I always say it's really tough to like say exactly what a producer does. And my kind of generic answer is everything, and just helps a little bit in each piece to keep things moving and keep production going forward. And what I love so much about the role and what I'm doing is every day is different. Every day has a different adventure, and all of these different shows have such different creativity that I get to use different aspects of my mind in working on children's content. If it's from scary stories with what we're working on right now, if it's for different African folk tales, which we're working on, and I get to use a lot of different parts of my brain and really ultimately just keeping progress moving forward and helping out, so that Anthony can now work with ABF on some of the more big picture things and help out in that regard, to keep the ship sailing.
Got it. Now let's talk about that big picture and those growth possibilities, Anthony. I know you're working with corporates more and more, but let's get into that a bit.
Yeah, like Mike mentioned, you know, we are working with corporates more and more. And, you know, he mentioned something that was really important in the early days. It was, mostly just me and Wanda Reynolds, shout out to her, who's our COO, and just, wearing every hat. And now that, corporate is so, our corporate partnerships, it requires so much of me. We kind of had to split in two ways, where most of my focus is on a lot of the business development and things of that nature, where a lot of the content is kind of being headed up by Wanda and Mike and several of our other producers. And so it takes a lot of trust. I say all that to say it takes a lot of trust to let go, because the company was built on a lot of my own creativity. A lot of it's ABF Creative. A lot of people don't know ABF is my initials. So, so it's Anthony Creative, right? In a sense, but you got to let go of that, because you got to put people in place to win. Put people in place that has really good ideas themselves and allow their ideas to flourish just as much as my ideas have flourished over the last few years as well. So that's what I'm all about. But we also have to think strategically about content. So creating what we create, and that's the reason why we're talking about kids and family, is because when we first came out, a lot of the focus was on just multicultural in general, which is great. But the focus now is on kids and family. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean we stop focusing on multicultural? No. I think when you look at who's on this call right now, you see a Black guy, you see a white guy, right? Or a Jewish guy, rather, right? You see two different guys from two different backgrounds, right? The multicultural is what we wear on our sleeves. Like, we don't have to say it. You're going to see it. When you hear our podcast, you're going to hear Black people, you're going to hear Latino people, you're going to hear Asians, you're going to hear almost every walk of life in the cast of the podcast. But then when you lift up the curtain and you look behind the podcast, you're going to see that same diversity. So for us, multicultural became a way of life. It's not our motto, it's the way we live. You know what I mean? It's not a marketing slogan. It's a way of life. So realizing that our focus on kids and family, now our goal is to be the Disney of podcasts. We want to we feel like this lane is wide open as far as who's making podcasts for kids, for families, for everyone. A study just came out from SiriusXM yesterday that just showed that co-listening is the biggest under measured thing in podcasting, meaning like there are always two or more people in the room when you're listening to a podcast. Well, I got news for you. People who are making kids and family podcasts knew that. Their kids don't listen to podcasts by themselves. They listen with their mom, their dad, with their brothers and their sisters. There's a comment, the latest review we just got on African Folktales is a little boy saying, hey, my name is, I forget his name, I think it was Ivan, and me and my brother Isaiah both listen to your pod. He's literally talking about the person he's co-listening with. So when you look at a podcast episode and you say, hey, it got 1,000 downloads, in all actuality, it might have got 3,000 downloads because the impact is multiplied. The numbers don't really count what's really going on behind the scenes. That's the kind of thing that we love about kids and family. The potential, the growth is there. The word of mouth is there. The referral network is there. But the impact more than anything is there. Being able to change people's minds, being able to change people's lives, tell stories that help them think about a problem a certain different way. That's something that you're not going to be able to do with a lot of other podcasts. We're bringing back Saturday morning cartoons, but except it'll be every day. So I said a lot, but but either way, I think I answered the question. So.
No, but that's really interesting. I never thought that. When I think about putting a podcast on with my kids are in the car, it's usually about business or tech, and they're like, "No, don't do it." And but what would be a podcast that you would recommend to start that rhythm or that experience? I mean, I guess it depends on the ages. Obviously, mine are teenager girls, but is there something that you sort of point to?
Well, if you have young kids, for us from ABF's catalog, the best way to start is charm words. So we have a daily affirmations podcast that releases every Monday through Friday, where we literally go over an affirmation. We do a breathing exercise. We give a small monologue, and then we encourage them to high five at the end, because there's a lot of scientific benefits to doing a high five. And so that's easy, and it's only 3 minutes. So that alone is the parents love it because it's short. Kids love it because it's engaging and it's interesting, and it has lots of cool sounds and noises and breathing exercises, so it keeps their attention. And so that will be the first thing for younger kids. For teenagers, we have a podcast we just released called Camp Red Rum, which is a scary stories podcast. So, you're hearing, sound effects, you're hearing very immersiveness, you're hearing almost like a movie on the ears. But it's scary, but not, it's too scary for young kids. But for teenagers and mid, like bridge age, which is like that, 7, 8 years old, they love it. And so, and then teenagers love it too, because it's horror fiction. That seems to be the thing these days. AMC just came out with a study saying that most of the viewers of their stuff is these Gen Zers who love horror. They can't get enough of it. So that's, that to me is what I would recommend for sure.
Got it. And Mike, how do you see things with the company, bringing your CBS background experience? I know, again, there's collaborations with Audible, and we can talk about those, but do you see other types of partnerships in the near future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're coming, and having my background and just it's really just a communication business and dealing with people and understanding how people work, and ultimately the goal is to get a podcast out there on time. And as Anthony illuminated before, of all the great parts about Charm Words and Camp Red Rum, the goal is to get these podcasts out on a timely fashion, get them to the right people. And for me, having the background of just working in the communication field with other people has helped in kind of guiding my producing level skills here with ABF that I can use, and I can manage and work with different companies like an Audible, for an example. And all that experience has helped me, because I'll always tell somebody there's no perfect world. There's always going to be something that doesn't go right. Then there'll be something that you have to do to deal with it. For an example, we have awesome podcasts where our kids are the characters, right? And there might be somebody's microphone breaks. What do you do? The microphone goes down, the episode's coming out in 9 days. All right, we got to figure out how we get, Circuit City that's in West LA, figure out how do we get this microphone over to this kid's house in the next 48 hours. And it's just problem solving like that. And I think having the background of dealing with putting out fires, and this is all this stuff, like, ultimately in the big scheme of life, isn't the hugest deal in the world. Like, I'm not performing surgery, I'm not doing anything like that, but it's just that problem solving element of figuring out in the moment what needs to happen and be corrected. And I think, using some of that skills has helped me here. If there's little things like that need to occur, because there's nothing like getting that email 2:46 in the middle of the night when it says, yeah, the microphone's gone down, the little cord that connects into the microphone doesn't seem to work. What do we do? We're problem solvers, we're solution driven, and we'll figure it out. And that's kind of part of the gig.
Got it. And speaking about the partnerships, Anthony, I know you were involved with Audible early on through New York Venture Partners, I believe.
Yeah.
Can you talk about sort of how those types of support mechanisms and partnerships and collaborations have helped?
Yeah, it's helped tremendously to get those opportunities. I think definitely my proximity played a huge part to the connection to Audible. I've been an entrepreneur in residence at New York Venture Partners for about, I would say, 3 years before starting ABF Creative, and so that I had a lot of previous relationships I built, and a lot of roads and highways that were built in that particular process, that once I decided I wanted to create a podcast company, it was still not easy, but simple to get someone on the line and be able to kind of pitch an idea to get a partnership going. And so since then, we've had partnerships with plenty of companies, Ben and Jerry's, Prudential Financial, the Grammy Museum, Headspace, Vox Communications, and so many others. And so Penna, the list can go on and on. Our goal in the beginning was to be taken seriously. And there's pros and cons to starting out as an actual production company. Because when you start as a production company, like where you're working with people and doing those partnerships, a lot of people expect you to stay in that lane, but we always had a bigger vision to create our own content, to create our own original series. And so you gotta the challenge for us was just really finding that balance. But yeah, if we wanted to be taken seriously from the beginning, I couldn't come out with, "Hey, I'm Anthony Frasier and I have this Anthony Frasier podcast," and people would have been like, "So what? What can you do for me?" Okay, I started off with the "what you can do for me" first, which is I can make a really good podcast for you. Once I got that established, then everything else became a lot more easier.
Got it. And you did have some funding, or is there what's the sort of background on that, and where are you at now, and where do you expect to be? I can't.
Yeah. Well, we're in the middle of raising $1 million round right now. I can't comment on the status of it, but we're good. You know, we're making progress. But as far as previous funding, yes. We participated in Newark Venture Partners accelerator. We were part of the I believe one of the last classes of the accelerator that Newark Venture Partners had done. And then after that, we actually participated in another accelerator at the Morgan Stanley Multicultural Innovation Lab, which was another really engaging, intense accelerator that we were part of, that I believe really shaped and molded us to be the company that we are today, for sure. So altogether, we've raised some venture funding we raised about a 350,000 early on in our life cycle.
That's great to hear. But Anthony, while we're on the topic of accelerators, in general, what advice do you give other entrepreneurs who may have the opportunity to be part of an accelerator? Was it a good experience, or any general guidance?
Yeah, I mean, my best advice for anyone in an accelerator is you get out of it what you put into it. And there may be some topics that the accelerator programming is going over that you might not think is for you. There may be some topics that you might think are for you. I think it's all about what you put in. So are you making the extra effort to meet with the coaches? Are you meeting with people and asking for more introductions? Are you going beyond just what's on the syllabus? Because to me, if you're just going by the syllabus in an accelerator program and not doing more than that, then I don't think an accelerator program is going to give you the results that you're looking for. An accelerator program is only going to be effective if you go above and beyond, meaning press them. Put the pressure on the coaches, put the pressure on the program directors, put the fire under their feet to make the introductions, follow up, really force their hand to really get the results that you want. And honestly, that's what they're looking for. That's what they're there for. They want you to do those things. If you don't take that extra effort, then an accelerator is not going to be very helpful to you.
Great advice. Great advice. So Mike, let's segue into the podcasting marketplace or landscape. I'd love to get both of your perspectives, but let's start with you on how you see it. There's so many podcasts, but give us sort of the scope of things these days.
Yeah. First off, I really dislike when people use it like in a negative connotation. I believe, like, truthfully, to my heart, if you want to start a podcast, don't be intimidated because there's a lot of podcasts out there. It's still really, as crazy as it sounds, in its infancy of where things are going and moving in its future. So I would say, yes, it's saturated with a lot of podcasts. Yes, there are a lot out there, but that shouldn't deter anybody from wanting to do their own podcast or create their own form of a network. And I would say for that purpose, be purposeful with your ideas and your thoughts. And Anthony alluded to something interesting before when he talked about like the them landscape. Think about an audience and what they would be interested in hearing from, and then using your expertise to kind of connect the dots between the two and come up with something that you're passionate about. So I think the marketplace right now, as crazy as it sounds, because there's so many different podcasts out there, I still think it's really wide open, and it's really wide open for different businesses to create podcasts, for different personal people to create podcasts. I would say looking at, traditional radio, and somebody wants to do a commercial and they get a 30-second commercial spot and they're on the air for 30 seconds and people hear it or they don't hear it. Well, why not create a podcast instead where you promote your business, but at the same time, explain how you're the expert of that field? And then people come to you as the experts while you're kind of promoting your business without saying that you're promoting your business. And I think different things like that it hasn't even been touched yet. And I think the marketplace, although yes, there's a lot of podcasts out there, and yes, there's a lot of stuff that, maybe doesn't last and wasn't thoroughly thought through in the beginning to make it last. But if you're purposeful and you're planning and you think about things the correct way, there's a market and there is availability for somebody to create content and get your voice out there.
Got it. And Anthony, what's your take?
Same thing. I echo the same sentiments. I don't know how I would say it any differently. So, good one, Mike. Good one.
Got it. Well, let me just, if you guys can share just one thing, there's a lot of folks out there who are thinking about starting a podcast. What's one tip you would give podcasters or future podcasters to consider?
Yeah, I mean, my best advice is, is setting realistic expectations. Success isn't overnight, and I think that sometimes we get hung up on that instant gratification. You see other individuals who have, garnered some kind of success. I just saw a TikTok video this morning where this guy was talking about, hey, these people run a podcast and they're making $3 million. And I'm like, hey, it's easy for somebody to see that who don't really know what went behind that truly, to feel like, well, I'm going to go start a podcast and I'm going to make $3 million. And then when they see like the download numbers aren't really matching where their mind was going to put the download numbers, to me, I think that could be discouraging. So just know that there are outliers. There are people who get lucky. Luck is a real thing. And there are people who build to where they're truly getting to go. So you'll know which way you are, and while you're building, you can get lucky too. So, in the process of building, you can get lucky. But there are some people who get lucky. You don't know when you don't know when it's going to happen. So to me, I think that would be my biggest advice is, set realistic expectations and know that success is going to take time.
Great. Mike?
Yeah, kind of to piggyback off of that answer is consistency and understanding, like Anthony said, realistic expectations plus consistency. You can build your brand and build your podcast. And you have to look at it, you do your first 3 weeks, 4 weeks of shows, you look at your downloads, you're disappointed. You look at your first 12 weeks, you're disappointed. Well, look at it after year 1 to year 2 to year 3, and then you can see consistent growth. Yes, our podcast grew 26%, 32%, 42%. And you can see that with hard work and consistency and a little bit of luck too, your podcast can do well. And I would say, just like anything else in life, there's times when I'm recording and I'm like, I don't want to do this. I'm tired. I had a long day. The last thing I want to do is turn on the microphone, talk for 45 minutes, and then have to edit. I was like, I want to sit down, watch Netflix, and space out and not do anything. And it's just like anything else. Put in the work, be consistent. It's there, and you will have results. And, with a little bit of luck and a little bit of talent, combine all that together, you can do something special.
Got it. Well, let's get into that a little bit about the challenges, right? There's so much opportunity out there. We can talk about that after challenges, but what are some of the challenges that people face in the podcasting field, as whether they're getting started or scaling their podcast?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is what we just mentioned. Is number one, consistency. Just being there, showing up when things don't look that good. The second one is actually marketing and growing your audience. That's a big challenge. A lot of people face that right now. That's a challenge that even we face for certain shows. We're like, how do we get this audience to grow? I think you can't scale. I think a lot of people are thinking in a tech way. How can I scale this? What kind of key trick can I pull, or what lever or what light switch do I flick to just make my podcast take off? And the God honest truth is there is none. It really all depends on who you are, what you do, what you're talking about, what is your subject matter. For instance, if I talk to a guy who has a barbershop podcast, and he's like, well, I want to grow my audience. I need more barbers listening to me. Well, how can you make a partnership with a barbershop association? That could be a nonprofit group filled with barbers. Okay, so obviously that's not a copy and paste strategy. I can't copy that strategy and give it to you, Jim. That is just not going to work. So you got to figure out, okay, who am I talking to, and how do I get in front of consistently can get in front of people that have my audience already. So if you're trying to get in front of entrepreneurs, well, online it might be a little tough. Like the ad prices are crazy because it's so competitive. But what are some local entrepreneur groups? What are some local entrepreneur organizations? What are some local organizations that do entrepreneurship in Philadelphia? Not even just New Jersey. Like, hey, how do I look in the next state? How do I look in Connecticut? So there's different ways. It's called duct tape marketing, because you can't do it. There's no cheat code. You got to duct tape this thing together. It's going to look crazy. It's going to look like a science experiment. It's going to look like a 5th grade science experiment. You got to duct tape your volcano together. There's no way to manufacture it. That's it.
I love that analogy, Mike.
Yeah, I would just say, and I think everything Anthony said was great. And when he mentioned audience, and I mentioned this a little bit before as well, knowing who your audience is from the beginning is something that's so important, so that when you go out and you try to market and you do all the techniques that Anthony laid out, knowing where you're going beforehand. And this is mistakes like I've made on a personal level and not knowing that. And now later on, I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But knowing where you're going and having a plan of execution on the people that but you believe will be interested based on what you're talking about or marketing, I think is a really helpful tool when then using Anthony's technique of knowing who that audience is as the best you can. And as you do a podcast too, like it evolves. You might not know right away. It might change. There's no perfect answer, but kind of keeping an idea of who that audience is as you grow and you evolve, keeping an eye on that, I think is really, really important.
One more tip that's a little bit more, I guess, executable for people listening is you can go to chartable.com right now, which is a site that ranks podcasts. And let's just say you're not ranking. I'll just hypothetically say I'm a podcast. I'm new. I just started. I'm not ranking anywhere. Okay, great. Let me go on Chartable. What category am I in? Am I in sports? Cool. What section? They got so many subdivisions in sports. Find a certain subdivision. Okay, let me scroll all the way down. Who's number 100 on the charts? Who's way at the bottom? Let me find out how to get in touch with that person. Mm-hmm. And maybe we can cross promote. And the reason why I'm saying at the bottom instead of the top, obviously, if you go all the way to the top, that person is going to be very hard to make any kind of promotional swap with. But the further you go down, the better. Now, you may think, well, this person ain't got no listeners. Well, listen, if I'm a podcast and I only got 10 listeners, but this guy has 50, well, that's 50 more people who are going to know about me. So that's that brick by brick duct tape that I was talking about. Yeah, is it harder? Yes. Does it take a lot of time? Yes. I'm sorry. I can't make it happen faster. But this is the kind of work that in a year from now, 2 years from now, you're going to look back and say, man, I'm so glad I did that. Man, and you're chilling now. You're chilling because you're not doing anything. But because you laid all of that groundwork, you've been able to go somewhere. Now, like I said, luck plays a factor. Are there people who get lucky? Yes. You can get lucky. You can make a YouTube clip, make it go viral on YouTube. You don't know. You can make a TikTok video. It can go viral. You never know. You have to keep shooting those shots too. You have to choose which shots you're going to shoot. You can't be everywhere at once. So choose which ways you're going to choose to market. So yes, luck and viralness does play a factor on some level. But this is the brick by brick stuff I'm talking about right now. And this is the stuff that's going to get you a little bit further.
And I love that. I just want to piggyback and say, because podcast listeners are always looking for other podcasts to find. So as Anthony said, like if you're finding somebody that's on that list, and you find them and they find you, they're like, oh, this is interesting. Now I want to branch more into more podcasters, because if it's a sports field or if it's that niche topic, they want more of it. So then they can find the other podcaster, and using that technique is a good one. And Chartable is definitely a great reference to find the people on the list, and kind of have an actual ranking system, and not just throwing darts against the wall.
Right. And so I'm glad you spelled out those challenges, because there are many. Now, what about the opportunities? What do you see as sort of those opportunities going forward?
I mean, an opportunity, it depends on who you are. You know what I mean? Like, that's another one of those answers that it's not necessarily copy and paste. If you're a business making a podcast, the opportunity is you're building a relationship with your customers. So maybe getting 1 million downloads isn't your goal. Maybe getting $1 million is, right? And so, like, if you're a doctor who's a plastic surgeon and you're making a podcast and making people feel comfortable, well, that comfort level just got you about maybe $100,000 more dollars, So you got to think about that. Like, what's your metric, right? So, are you building relationships? If you're a business, we've done the one of the podcasts that we work on is the Ben and Jerry's podcast, and Mike is one of the executive producers on that podcast. He could tell you for himself. Their podcast is all about relationships. They're building content to build a relationship with the audience that they most identify with culturally. You know what I mean? Like, that's what their podcast is for. They're not aiming to go take over iHeartMedia. No, that's not their goal. Their goal is simply, we want to build a relationship with the people that we feel like we identify with ourselves. That's what their podcast is about. That's what your podcast, maybe that's what it's about. If it's a business, if you're an individual, same thing. Maybe the opportunity is you got a side hustle. Let me make a podcast that's around that. You don't need 1 million listeners to get customers, to get 100 customers a month. A lot of people just don't think about the numbers like that, right? If you're doing a crochet podcast and you only get 500 listeners a month, but you have an Etsy shop where you sell your personal crochet stuff, and out of those 500 listeners, you generate 50 customers a month for a $100 crochet item. I mean, there's the opportunity. That's the opportunity right there. And you can't ignore that. So it really also just depends, like what we talked about earlier. What are your goals? The opportunities really just depends on what your goals are. If your goal is to be thought of as a thought leader, the opportunity is there. Every podcast you put out, where you're talking, extensively about a subject, well, get it transcribed. Turn that podcast into a blog. Have the search engines crawl it so that people who search this topic can find you, then listen to discover your podcast. But guess what? They may be like, hey, I'm a professor at the University of Southern California. I love what you talked about on this show. I want you to come speak to my students. That's happened. You don't need 1 million listeners for that. So the opportunities are endless. If you really are good at what you do, you should start now.
That's great. Great advice there. Mike, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just add to it. I think what's cool about podcasts is that there's the niche, they're all niche, and you can execute based on that. Like Anthony's example, you can use what your niche podcast is to then find niche resources to do niche advertising, because yeah, maybe you only get 1,000 downloads a month, but those 1,000 downloads are all from somebody that loves how to do yoga, right? It's the yoga listening audience. So you then can go and promote it specifically to that audience, as opposed to if you're doing something more generalized and you're trying to find it's 100 downloads, or it's even more downloads, but it's so generalized, the advertiser's like, well, we don't know if it'll work for us. Well, if you know that you've got that niche topic and you've got that hardcore listenership where that listenership's going to need that product, you can use that opportunity to make ad sales, even though your podcast maybe isn't the most downloaded in the world, but it's so focused on a certain topic, you can take advantage of that. And that's just finding that opportunity within what you're providing the listener.
Right. And there's also different ways to support podcasts if people want to monetize, right? Of course, advertising if you have a ton of downloads, but there's also sponsorship possibilities or corporate partnerships, which could be a possibility. Can you just talk to that a bit, both of you?
Yeah, I mean, advertisement, there's a difference between advertisement and sponsorships. Ads for the most part, well, programmatic advertising, where you could just have a random ad playing on your podcast. Those really necessarily don't pay as much if you don't have a lot of downloads. What Mike just said was essentially, hey, I have a yoga podcast. I have 1,000 dedicated hardcore yoga people who listen to my podcast every month. You do a lot more to get a sponsorship. A sponsor may pay some good money to get in front of those 1,000, yoga users every month. So you have to go where you have to communicate where your value is seen the most, right? For us, we're a Kids and Family Podcast Network. We want to talk directly to people who want to get in front of kids and families. We're going to probably get more money from people who want to get in front of directly kids and families. If we went to some, catch-all podcast media, ad network where they require 100,000 downloads per episode or 10,000 downloads per episode, just so they can, it's a volume game, not a value one. So you want to go play the value game. You don't want to play the volume game. We're not in the business of volume. We're in the business of value. And that's where, if you want to make money in podcasts, I'm pretty sure this applies to anyone who's listening to this. If you want to make money in podcasts, you have to play the value game. In order to play the value game, you have to niche. Who are you talking to? How are you talking to them? Do you even have a case study? No, do some studies. Create some avatars. Put a pitch deck together. Approach your sponsors, potential sponsors, the same way you go out and you get sponsors for an event that you might be hosting. Use that same technique to go get sponsors for your podcast. And don't turn your nose up at local sponsors. If there's a local yoga studio and they can give you $100, take it. Because what's going to happen is money is energy. I know I'm getting it, but my thing is you're getting in the energy of, hey, people want to pay for this podcast. Listeners, that comes across to your listeners. They're going to see that, even if it's local yoga studio, but your listeners like, this is valuable. Somebody's paying for this. What it's going to say is larger sponsors are going to see that too. So you're creating a resume. You're creating a history. And so, yeah, if someone wants to come by and only pay you $100, I say take it. Give them the best $100 presentation you can put together, and keep a record of it. Create a case study out of it. Use that same $100 case study to go to a larger sponsor. You don't have to tell a larger sponsor, hey, this guy only paid me $100. They don't ask you that. Nobody's ever going to know you only got $100. But what they are going to know is, what did you do for that $100? How did you present it on the podcast? How did you create the pre-roll? What was the script that you read when you read about the ad? How did you put it on your website? Did you write about it on your newsletter? When you put that case together, that's what the larger sponsors are going to want to see. And you can only do that if you start with smaller sponsors. So if somebody only got $50 for you, take it. Somebody only got $100 for you, take it. The other thing I would say is, if they're going to pay $100, $50, or whatever, even if it's larger, hundreds of thousands, always make them commit on a monthly basis. So say, hey, look, I'll give you $50 for the sponsorship slot, but it's a 3-month minimum, and so you have them pay in 3-month increments, I said a lot, but I'm just trying to make sure people leave with something that can actually be tangible. So
that's really helpful. Mike, did you have anything to add?
Anthony said a lot of great details there. I'll just kind of add to it that consistency factor. If you don't have that, you can't execute that. So remember, when you're putting your plan together, the consistency of doing it every week, because if you're starting If that consistency fails or dies down, then those sponsorships die down with it. So just remember to have that consistency part so that then when you get to this part of the plan, it kind of all gels and comes together.
Fantastic. So this has been a great conversation. Any other future trends that you want to leave us with before we conclude our conversation?
I don't really have any trends. I would just say, every company is a media company, no matter what you do. And I think that's something. I think that's a Gary Vaynerchuk quote there. And that wasn't the quote I was going to use, but yes, every company is a media company. So, I don't care if you're a laundromat. Find a way to make content. Find a way to put yourself out there. So that's what that's the trend that I would point to.
Okay. Mike, anything else?
Yeah, just don't be shy in finding who you think your audience is. Don't be shy in finding what your voice is. Connect those two together. And I think that's a recipe for putting your future plan together and wanting to know what podcast you want to do. And that I think that to me is the way things are trending, because it is saturated with a lot of different podcasts. So make sure yours stands out, and yours will stand out because everybody's unique, everybody's different. There is a way for it to stand out because of who you are, but just make sure you can recognize those points early so that you can go in and create success for yourself.
Great. So we usually end our conversations with a saying or a poem. So why don't we start with you, Anthony? Share with us something that's meaningful to you.
Yeah, Jim Rohn, who's a motivational speaker from the 80s and I think the 70s, 80s, and a little bit of the 90s. He had a quote that I thought was really good, which is work harder on yourself than you do on your job. And I think that I think we forget that what you do at work is the end result of what you do in life. And so, if I'm not sleeping 8 hours, it's going to show up in my work. If I'm not spending time with my family enough, it's going to show up in my work. If I'm not enjoying life, it's going to show up in my work. If I'm not exercising and eating right, it's going to show up in my work. And I think that sometimes we got that role reversed where we think work is going to solve all those problems, but it never does. No, all those problems solve all the work problems. And so I've noticed in my own life that when I'm following the morning routine, eating good, checking in on my emotional energy and my emotional connections, enjoying and bringing some peacefulness and some zen around me, I work better. I have more energy. I have more energy to get on the phone call. I have more energy to send 100 emails, maybe. I have more energy to even write an email. There's been days where I'll just sit in front of the computer and I just cannot type, like just looking at it. And because I had no energy to even type. And so that's because, things that I've done outside of that has affected what I've done inside it. So that's just something that I think, people should take heed to. Personal development is a big thing and people should focus on it for sure.
Got it. All right, Mike.
All right. Well, I know when we were chatting earlier, Anthony was thinking of sports quotes. So I'll give you a good sports quote. I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that's Michael Jordan. So he's, you could argue and get into a debate, but for this purpose, the greatest basketball player in the history of the NBA has failed that many times. Don't be afraid to fail. It's going to happen. Be consistent with taking your shot. If it doesn't go in, fine, but at least don't be scared to try something. You never know. You might send an email to a guest you want to book. You might think, oh, there's no chance in the world this person will come on. If you don't type it and hit send, if you never did it, there's a 0% chance. If you type it and send, the chance went up. I don't know how much, but it did. So don't be afraid to take your shot and don't be afraid to miss it.
That's a great quote to end with. Thank you, Mike. And thank you, Anthony. This has been a great conversation. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please like it, leave a review, and subscribe. See you soon.